Democratic State Senator Nathan Johnson of Dallas. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. As you know, Governor Abbott has until Sunday to issue any vetoes, including on the budget. And he has threatened to veto the legislative portion of the budget. So I'm wondering what your thought is about that.
I think that he's maybe gotten some bad advice. That's an extraordinary measure. It's inconsistent, if not with the letter of the state constitution, with the spirit of the state constitution. We do have a separation of powers here. The legislature controls the purse. And to say to the legislature, do what I want you to do in a special session, or else we're not going to pay the people who work in the Capitol, is not appropriate. It's not probably not constitutional, and it sends the wrong message, I think, to the people of the state of Texas.
And so are you expecting it though?
I don't know at this point. I was surprised that he said it in the first place. It hasn't happened yet, normally the process is we go in for our 30 days. If he's not happy with what we've done, he calls us back for another 30 days. But to hold hostage the salaries of the people who work in that building strikes me as well beyond the way things ought to function. I hope not. I hope it doesn't come to that because I don't think that's how the two branches of government should be working at all. Because we're not really working together at that point. We're working against each other.
He did so in response after, as you know, House Democrats walked out of that session and leaving Republicans with no quorum, which, the Democrats say, hey, that's one of our legislative tools that we can work with. And so what do you make of that? Because, some Republicans say the Democrats walked off the job. Democrats say that's one of our tools.
It is. There's a difference. They're constitutionally allowed to walk off the job. As they left with 1 hour left. The business of the state, to the extent that it got done at all, was done. And with an hour left, the Republicans pushing this legislation that was very offensive to the Democrats made it worse in the closing hours. So they walked off. But when you're talking about whether or not the people who work at the Capitol get paid for the jobs they're doing, I mean, that's not stuff that's supposed to happen in first world nations. It's just not how it works at all. There's not really a comparison between the Democrats in the House walking off the floor with an hour left on using the last thing they could use to try to stop, I think, an unjustified assault on the voting rights, the political rights of the people of the state, and the governor threatening to not pay people if he doesn't get his way with legislation. I don't think they're comparable at all.
So if that does happen, then you and the Senate and the House would have to vote to restore it. Would that be one way that I guess the governor thinks would keep the Democrats from doing the same thing?
I don't know what he's thinking. Let's just pose the hypothetical that if the legislature, for whatever reason, is unable to pass some measure that the governor thinks should pass, and then the governor vetoes that Article 10 of the budget, who is it that's keeping pay from people at the Capitol? Is it Democrats who blocked the legislation, or is it the governor who invoked this unjustified violation of the separation of powers? So I just hope we're not forced into that circumstance.
You brought up the elections integrity bill, and you said that it's unjust. Republicans have made it clear that they are going to pass this. So what can you, as a Democrat and other Democrats, do to try to block it?
Well, there really is a lot we can do other than block it. Everybody's in favor of election integrity. Everybody wants to have trust in the outcome of their elections. And for, among other reasons, I want to trust the results of elections so that the next time the elections go the way I want them to go, nobody on the other side claims that there's fraud. I talked to the Republicans 2 years ago about having paper trail voting machines. There is much contained within Senate Bill 7 that should not be objectionable to anybody, and some of it is pretty good. There's a lot of it that's really, really bad. So we don't have to block it. We just have to get them to agree to take out the most offensive, most patently violative of our rights and the spirit of our voting, get it out of the bill. There is a good bill that can be hammered out between Republicans and Democrats where we're all equally unhappy, but a little bit happy. We don't have to kill it. We just have to make it better.
Is that possible in your estimation?
It wasn't possible during the session, and it was really pretty remarkable in those final days for it not to get better because there was a lot of other legislation. Some of it just got rammed through, but there were things that were difficult that towards the end of the line, compromises were reached, and bills wound up in a better state than they started in. That's not what happened. In fact, the opposite happened with Senate Bill 7. And so, no, we couldn't make it better during the session. But since then, the national dialogue is growing in strength. And I think there's a great deal of pressure on Republicans to appear like they're really in favor of election integrity, not in favor of spectacle, not in favor of stunts, not in favor of voter suppression, not in favor of rigging elections. So I think there's going to be a little more pressure on them to provide a much more reasonable bill. For example, let's just take one provision that was added late, not allowing voting before 1 o'clock on Sundays. What's the compelling state interest in not having voting before 1 o'clock on Sundays, other than the fact that a lot of Democrats who attend black churches go vote on Sunday mornings? I mean, I don't think that's going to fly in the court of public opinion. They've got to pull that out.
The Republicans, I mean, when I interviewed the governor a couple of weeks ago, he quoted Representative Clardy, who said that that was a mistake. And the House speakers told me the same thing, that that was a clerical error. It was too late to take out once they realized it. Do you believe that?
No. I mean, it's a double typo, right? And I think they said it was going to be 11. It was supposed to be 11 a.m., not 1 p.m. So they had an
Right.
extra one and a P instead of an A. I mean, I don't know, and I don't. I think Travis Clardy is a good representative, to be honest. And I don't think he's intending to keep people from voting. But whatever anybody's intentions, um, there is no reason for the state to be telling people what time the polls can open on Sunday morning. You just don't do it.
Let me ask you, what do you make this week of ERCOT's request for people to conserve after a whole bunch of power plants went down for maintenance?
I think it scared people. And so when we ask ourselves, was that a big deal or was it not a big deal? It's both. That in contrast to elections law, it bears mentioning here that the electricity, the ERCOT related legislative efforts this past session were really done on a bipartisan basis, and we all worked together quite well on those issues. But we weren't able to fix everything. Again, contrary to what the governor's saying, it's not fixed. We made progress. It was partial and it's imperfect. And I think in any other summer, if ERCOT had said, hey, we've got some plants down, everybody please conserve energy, I think there might have been a little bit of grumbling. But coming off of the February storm disaster and this session, it frightens people, right? It's not even that hot out, and we're being asked to curtail. Now, when you think about the idea that we should conserve power in order to not have a blackout, conserving power shouldn't be so upsetting, but it's scary, right? Why do we need to do that? Why were these plants down? Didn't we not learn our lesson in February? But we run a very complex, unique market here in Texas. It's not as big a deal as it feels like. In fact, the system worked more or less as it was supposed to because we contract for these sort of emergency services. They're called ancillary services. We called upon them. The power was there. We didn't have any rolling brownouts. Everything was fine. Prices went up a little bit on the wholesale market, but they did not hit their max levels. We were really several stages away from really being in trouble. But again, it's disconcerting to us on the consumer end to know that, gosh, we might be in trouble if the thermostat hits, or if the temperature outside hits 95 degrees. So we made some progress in the session regarding the electrical system in Texas, but there is a lot of work to do still.
I was going to ask you, what do you think needs to be done still?
We still lack what we call dispatchable generation. And there is a political discussion around the question of whether we have too much solar and too much wind, and that's discouraging, disincentivizing investment in thermal, i.e., fossil fuel generation. I don't think that discussion is going to be resolved in any kind of way that's going to meet the need. We are going to have more stuff on demand. The question is, how much time can we buy ourselves before batteries come online and wind turbines and solar panels are able to generate enough electricity to power us through the night when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing? In the meantime, we need to be able to spark up a gas-fired power plant and make sure there's power here right now. We need to be able to be sure that if it gets really cold, there's enough fuel reserves on supply and that our pipelines are mapped out, and so that we know we're not cutting power plants and so that we don't lose power at those emergencies. Part of it is simply the issues we addressed of communication throughout the supply chain, throughout the production chain of power between the Railroad Commission, the PUC, ERCOT, the generators, the gas producers, the retail electric providers, transmission utilities, all of that needs to work seamlessly, and it wasn't. We've done a lot of work to make that better. But the bigger problem, the harder thing to do, is rig up our market so that we do get more investment in that immediately dispatchable power. It's expensive, and long term, it's an uncertain future. And a lot of that is going to be guided by the legislature, but to a large degree, shaped by experts in the industry, the people on the board of ERCOT, the people in the commercial side of that, and the people at the PUC and the Railroad Commission. We are going to need to work closely with experts to make sure that the kinds of market incentives that are built into our very complex market do in fact yield the levels of investment we need to make sure that we have enough power in Texas. And as we saw a few days ago, we don't quite yet have that.
So is this a sense where ERCOT and the PUC themselves have to step up to better regulate or perhaps just oversee the market?
They definitely need to step up and take a more active role in regulating and making sure all the parts are working. But they're also going to have to work with us at conceiving new ways for the market to work. I mean, we're literally going to have to create new ancillary service products, for example.
What does that mean when you say
Well,
ancillary services?
it's a funny word that is hard to hold on to, but it basically means backup power, because it's not just a question of us being able to turn on our lights and our stoves and our air conditioners. It's a question of the supply of electricity in and the demand drawing out has to be balanced all the time. And if it isn't, stuff blows up, and then we're all in trouble. So these ancillary services are things that we can call upon to make sure that as demand rises, the supply rises so that everything keeps working. And they're expensive, and they actually generate profits for companies, which cause them to invest and make sure we have enough power. We've designed a market where profits drive the available supply of power, and that's fine, and it's worked very, very well in most circumstances. But we're beginning to encounter with increasing frequency circumstances where that balance between the market and the supply and the demand is not holding up. And so
And
we're
is,
going to have to come up with other ways for the market to function to give us that energy.
and is that just because of population growth? And, we've got more electric vehicles on the road now, and so that puts a demand on it, or is there something else?
It's absolutely population growth playing a major role. Air conditioning is playing a major role, but we also have increasing high temperatures, increasing low temperatures, right? The whole idea of climate change, global warming, is not just that we have warmer summers. It's you have greater extremes of hot and cold, and those are the events that really, really push us to the limits of our production capacity. And that I don't foresee that changing. We're not going to shrink our population, and the weather's not going to get nicer. We have growing power needs because of the weather and because of an increasing amount of uh, population growth and our industrial activity here. The stuff we do, data centers, they burn a lot of electricity. The energy production industry itself, the manufacturing that happens in this state, making microchips, all of this stuff requires power. And we're growing, and that's great, but we need to make sure that our power infrastructure is adequate to meet the exciting growth that we're experiencing here in Texas.
Let me ask you one other question, and you talked a little bit about it before. This session seems that there was some hardball politics going on between Republicans and Democrats. Is that a fair observation?
That's a fair observation. And if you want me to
You want to
elaborate
weigh
on,
in on that?
yeah, yeah, look, I'll just be completely candid. It was worse than it needed to be. I've been there 2 sessions. It was worse than my first, and I'm told by everybody it was worse than just about all the others before it from the standpoint of that pure partisan combat, that kind of unproductive stuff that plays well in primary elections but doesn't really serve a whole lot of other purpose. So that's my take on the session. We really did get a lot of good work done. Credit to my Democrat and my Republican colleagues. We got a lot of stuff done under the headlines, under the partisan rancor. But it was hard to get up and go in there every day knowing that for the most part, the show is about a Republican primary. It really was dominated by issues that rile up a small segment of Texas voters. And that's not how it's supposed to work either. I'm hopeful that next session we get back to work much more like we did in the 2019 session. And I think some of the electoral results of the 2018 election drove a much more sensible, productive session in 2019. Whereas in the 2020 elections, I think that the perception is that people want more of these extreme issues on the agenda. I think that's a misperception. We'll find out whether I'm right
In 2022.
in 2022.
All right, Democratic State Senator Nathan Johnston, thank you so much for your time and your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for bringing me on and talking with me. Good to see you.
Good to see you.